If we really went off the rails or something, I was like, well,
I'm planning on it. I'm planning on starting off the rails and then continuing off the rails and then finishing off the rails. It's rolling.
oh, okay.
Yeah. This is how I start my podcast, apparently.
Yeah.
I just taught this
you happy
message
too?
about the solo season.
Yeah.
Right? So, unbalanced and okay with it, all 3 of the weeks, referencing the idea of just how unbalanced life is. And it's definitely been the case for me in every season of my life that I've never been able to find balance. I've just found the way to be able to live in whatever that season is, right? And so the solo season, for instance, for sure, unbalanced solo season for me. And by, I guess, just like osmosis, you, because like you were in your solo season before we met, but obviously like your adult solo season was joining our church plant, being part of us, dating, all of that. And because I was a pretty unbalanced person, you had to be an unbalanced person too.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Well, too, I think about my solo season was shorter than a lot of people's.
Yours was a lot shorter than a lot of people's.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it for some
So
reason.
it's kind of like, I feel like it's definitely not like comparable to a lot of people's. But at the same time, it is because like I was thinking about the fact that like when I think back, okay, like solo season, yeah. So when we got married, I was 20.
Yeah,
So
that's young.
technically, it ended early, and you were 25.
Yep.
So yours was a little bit longer. If we talk about like when we entered that next season. So yeah, I think about like those years of being a teenager, like 14, 15, 16, and then like,
I think that's when it starts too.
Yeah.
Because like really before that, I don't think you understand what the solo season is. So it's like, it's not until you get to like that, whatever that moment is, I don't know. It probably is something like 14 or 15 or something like that when you really have that awakening of like adulthood, right?
yeah, and just like some thoughts of your life and where it's going and things. And one of the things you said in your message was how the gift of the solo season is focus.
Yeah.
And a lot of things you talked about in your message, of course, it like made me think back. It made me think about people I know who are in that season and how, it is a gift and there's things that God's doing in it. And it was just so good, such a good reminder. But then also, like, of course, it made me think back to my own solo season and then yours as well. Like the little bits you shared, it made me think, back to that time. But I think it's interesting because, like, focus is the gift of that season. But a lot of people, like, get so distracted in that season with different things and with, like, relationships.
Yeah.
So it's like they spend those years that should be focused, distracted with other things. Like I think maybe trying to prepare for the next season or like get in the next season.
Yeah.
Like rush to that season of like being in a relationship. But what's so interesting about you and I that we had in common about like our solo season is that we purposely didn't date until like we started dating. So like you did, and you had a period of time where you didn't.
I dated until I was 16. Well, not really even, but
Yeah.
whatever. Before that, you're young and whatever. But right, I dated, and when I was 16, I broke up with whatever our relationship was. It's like I'm not with somebody. And then right, it was 16 until 23 when we started dating.
Right.
So it was 7 years between then that I just basically just knocked that out of my life and didn't have any of the focus on it. And I think that that's part of why I saw what I did in my life, though, for sure. Because I agree what you're saying is like, so the gift of the solo season is focus, but you can definitely like reject that gift, right? Like obviously the danger is the laziness, but aside from that, you can really reject that gift of focus and you can absolutely distract yourself, where I feel like at that same time, had I been like frantically trying to figure out like, or trying to like find that person, yeah, there would have been tons of opportunities that would have never been taken, for sure. I mean, one, you're just more distracted, like you wouldn't see things.
Right.
But then definitely too, like, yeah, I don't know that I would have given myself the way I did to like the experiences I had for like our campus ministry or things like that, where I was able to really give all that, if I was trying to impress somebody else, if I was concerned about somebody else's like emotions and thoughts and feelings and trying to like build that relationship with them, it would be hard.
And I think focus is the key word there, because it's like your focus is on something else. It's not like you're not open to relationships. It's not like you're like, I'm not going to start a relationship with someone else. Like maybe for a period of time. And I was in that season where it was actually because we were part of a youth ministry and your mom had, if you were a leader, you were not going to date. So that was
Which
the
makes
primary
so much
reason.
more sense, actually, the older I've gotten,
Yes.
right? Of like,
Yes.
you don't need to be dating, because if you're in this season, the benefit of this season is focus. So
Right.
why on earth would we implement, and why would we encourage you to chase something that we know is going to be a distraction? And it definitely is at that time, because I feel like every bit of like teenage love is infatuation. So then it's not just even like, oh, like we're dating or whatever. Like we have people in our church right now who are dating and they're in their like 20s or in their 30s. And it's a whole different type than
Right.
when you're 16 years old and it's like sitting there staring at text bubbles, like waiting for them to text you back, or like that infatuation level of like the other person, which would just rob so much of your focus away.
It seems so drastic at the time, like when we were teenagers,
Yeah.
of like,
It's like giving up a lot.
which I loved as a girl though, having that excuse of like guys being like, oh, I don't date. And even then guys would be like, what do you mean you don't date? Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't go on dates. I'm not pursuing a relationship right now. And it's so true that in hindsight, you're like, thank God. Like that was the best thing probably. But at the time, I remember even struggling with it, being like, am I never going to have a boyfriend? Like,
Right.
like,
Which
well,
is so
how's this gonna turn
stupid,
out?
because
It
of course you're
is.
doing that as like a 16-year-old.
And yes, you're like 15,
Yeah.
16.
Yeah, and you're not anywhere near the place of like actually being ready to like marry. So, and of course in our
Right.
Christian world of like actually trying to save yourself, which
Yeah.
thankfully, probably that's one of the multitude of things that actually led to the fact that both of us actually did stay virgins until we got married, which of course is like drastically uncommon in our culture, even in our church culture currently, right? That was the case, that we were able to maintain that. But it is though, because so much of that was pushed off. And no, there's so much benefit to that. I feel like that's so much though. Like that's so much of like everything that like God's word is like people are so afraid to let go of something, right? But like almost everything that God calls us to, like when he has something better for us, it comes with us letting go of something else. Like when Jesus actually says, like, seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you. Like I've always thought about that so much. And I feel like that was the verse that actually really comforted me when I was in it, is I felt like that was like the promise I was holding on to when like I wasn't pursuing dating at all, when like that wasn't it. And of course at 16 it was just like whatever. But then by the time you come around to like 23,
Right.
like believing and like hoping that like that's the case. Like if I put God's kingdom first, and if that's my first endeavor, that like God would take care of everything else. But that being said, obviously, like I think both of us have said in the past, like both of us were convinced that we were never going to get married already at that age. At 23, when we were planning our church, like, well, especially a 23-year-old virgin, hasn't dated in 7 years.
Right. And your family members like literally were thinking something's off with you, like you.
Oh yeah, my extended family was. That's right, I forgot about that. Yeah, when we would go to Christmas and stuff like that, they were like weirded out, thinking that there was something
Yeah.
in the closet or something. It's like, no.
That's how like
Foreign
unusual
it
it
is.
is.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Like you think about like now it's like being past that and stuff. Sometimes you forget, but like same with me though, like never having like a boyfriend all those years when it's so common to like have it high school and college,
Yeah. But it was like, at that time, I think it did get difficult for a moment, because I remember when we were planning our church, like me thinking like, I think I'm just going to be single forever. Like, I don't see how like, I don't see how God is going to provide like a wife for me, like me as a pastor now. Like, it just felt
Yes.
like impossible, because I thought like, right, if like a girl shows up at our church, like it's going to be incredibly like inappropriate for me to try to pursue her. And then like also like, since we planted Acts, I just felt like if I go on a dating app and meet someone or something, or I find somebody, I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. So is she gonna fall in love with
Right.
Axe and come
Yeah.
move here to be part of it? Because I'm not leaving. And it felt, yeah, like it was gonna be like, oh, well, I guess maybe I'm never gonna be, but like I'm okay as long as I'm like with you and like in his will. And then of course, then he did provide the fact that like we didn't have a relationship all throughout that until we started it while we were in our church plant season. Which looking back probably wasn't a great idea either, but it worked.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that, like you said, looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, I was 18 years old. Like, why was I thinking already, like, I'm never going to find. But what I was feeling was like, I'm never going to find someone as serious about Jesus as I am. I'm never going to find a guy who's like saving himself. You know, even at that time, I was like, I knew I wanted to, but I was like, I'm not going to put that pressure on someone else. And I'm probably not going to, you know, that's very rare. And like, I'm not going to hold that against anyone. So I'm just okay with whatever, you know, God has for me. But I think that when I look back, I can see that like that was a lot of the enemy like whispering in my ear to be
Yeah.
like, you know, you're never going to find anyone. Like, why are you waiting? Like, why are you holding out? Like, basically, that I'm missing out on so much now. Like, why would you wait? And not even like in the sexual way, but just like, why wouldn't you just date? And like, why wouldn't you have relationships and stuff? It's like the focus on what you're missing out on. But then as you're older, like us looking back, it's like, we didn't miss out on anything.
No, just drama,
Yeah.
chaos, other
Probably
things.
heartbreak and things like that, that when your focus is in the right place and on God, it's like, I don't have any regrets from that season of like, you know, oh, I missed out. I really wish I would have dated some more people. You know, like I don't have that regret.
For sure.
So it's like putting your focus in the right spot on God. Yeah, there's so much that you don't have to live with regret later, but it's like when God does bring that, you know, when you go step into the next season, you know.
I feel though like too, so for me, yeah, 23 is not that long, obviously, for some other people as far as what they've experienced. But I still feel like during that time, it let me carry a different focus. Obviously, like even just in prayer and in those things when I was feeling like God's leading for my life, you know, I experienced, I don't know, like I think at that time I experienced some interesting weight in my life, because that was like, you know, do you remember that season I went through where I was convinced I was going to be dead in 5 years when I was that age? For some weird reason, I was just like convinced that I had like 5 years left, and like I just used that as a marker of like, how would I live if I had 5 years left? Which I actually think is a pretty good question to ask yourself consistently, because it would actually eliminate some things. But, you know, 1 year left, you probably cut things too short. 20 years left, you probably stretch things too far out.
Yeah.
5 years left is about right. You got some time to plan, but you're like, it's going to be short, so how would I live it? So like at that time, I really did just like pursue all out those different pieces, and I gave up a lot of opportunities that weren't the primary focus. But yeah, I think, so that season for me was definitely like, it was the focus season, because that was when after when I was in high school, I got serious about my faith, like actually believed Jesus was who he said he was, poured myself into student ministry. Like we did so much different stuff in our student ministry, because I was like a student helper with my mom, right? All these different things that we did, and just like learning that by like giving myself to that. There was a time there when right after high school, we launched like the campus ministry, because I was like, I want to start a campus ministry at IBCC where I'm at, and I want to do like this gathering. And it was just wild, because I remember there were routinely weeks in that season where it would be that it would be Tuesday evening would be prayer, Wednesday evening would be our student ministry, Thursday evening would be our college ministry, and then sometimes Friday evening we would have another student thing, like at least once a month. And then of course like Sunday morning, like whether I was like on the worship team or whatever else I would do. And it was just like a full routine. But I think it was like honestly so good for me too though, because I did, if you picture like everyone has to get their 10,000 hours to be like a professional, I was like cranking out at like a way higher speed than what normal people were going through, because I was just like in it every day, right? And I feel like I was able to like make so much progress in that, where, you know, it probably is pretty uncommon that people would feel a call to like plant a church at like 23 years old, right? But like that was the case for me, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things you said this weekend in the message was how the superpower of the solo season is yes.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like looking back, like what were some things that you were able to say yes to that you think back in that season?
Well, so I mean, when you go back to student ministry, a lot of times I was the one who's even driving some of that with my mom, right? But like again, that's still like a yes. Like you're pulling into more, and like calling more out of like other people and pushing forward into stuff. But like that was like when I did like my first really large events, like that event Hosapalooza that we did, like really big events, right? Where I could just pour tons and tons of time into it, and like work out those details. But then no, so when I got out of high school and I knew I was going to IBCC, that was when Dave, he ended up coming through as like connected to the Assemblies of God, which we were connected with, and like talked to me about like campus ministry, and then talked about like the idea that like, you know, are you going to start like these groups on campus and this? And I was like, yeah, like let's do that, right? And then at the same time, that was when we had a bunch of college students who were like aging out of like our student ministry, and they were all like, we should do something, like we should get together, like we should do this. And of course, again, people just like looked at me as like, we should do this. And like, because of me being a leader, it's like, it means that I should like do this. And I was able to say yes, and then like launch that, start that, right? Like put together something where I was able to ask like our lead pastor, like, would you be willing to like give me a space and give me a time to be able to use the building and do this underneath of your authority? And then when Fusion was growing, which was that campus ministry, there was that opportunity where then Dave is like, we need somebody to become like the guy who's like the first like regional director to pull things together. I remember like going to these like meetings where we went to this big meeting like down in Bloomington, and we're like talking, and he was talking about all the whole strategy and how like it would be a substantial sacrifice for somebody because there's no budget, there's no pay, it would just be a tremendous amount of work, but like we would have the opportunity to build this whole system. And I remember driving home, my sister was with us, and I remember telling her, like, I think I'm the guy. And she's like, you're definitely the guy. And I was like, so I remember reaching back out to him, and then him saying, like, yeah, I think you're the guy too. But like that was a crazy season because I would cut out at least between while I was going to college and then I was still working at our family business. I would cut out at least, it was like probably 2 days a week to like work on all this networking stuff. And then it just meant like a ton of like traveling around, like all around this area and going to these like meetings and these gatherings and meeting campus pastors and going and talking to like churches. And then that even like turned into then like doing stuff where we were traveling, like, and I got to go to Honduras for like an entire week and teach college kids in Honduras how to create our cell strategy that we had and be able to do it. And that was like a crazy opportunity, right? To be able to say yes to, and go and spend a whole week like speaking vision to these college kids and teaching them through like translators, which was so cool. But like getting to do that, or getting to go to Chicago and getting to spend time with college ministries out of a church and like teach them our cell strategy. And then that went all the way to the fact of like when I was even still wrestling with our like the concept of like whether we plant the church, I was able to like go and spend like literally almost 3 weeks in England, where I was just able to go and I was doing this work for Fusion, but then I was able to tack like a whole nother week on of just spending time to like talk to just Roger Ellis, who's like a church planter in England. And like all those things are like yeses that like, right, like if I had pursued other things in my life that could have like, there's no way I probably could have made time to do that. But at that time, I could just say yes because it's like, well, I work a part-time job, like I do these things. I had zero expenses because I was still at that time like living with my parents and stuff, like going to college. So you just had this opportunity to say yes to the next opportunity and yes to the next opportunity. And like, yeah, the amount of connections that it built or like the skills that it built were just crazy during that time. Or then, I mean, honestly, even then feeling the call to like plant Acts Church was like a huge yes, because again, it's like we had nothing. So it's just, are you willing to walk into something that's like, it's just fog, right? But again, like it's kind of like that amazing season where you're like, worst case scenario, and it's like, it's not that bad because like you don't really have a lot to lose either at that time.
Yeah.
There's so much upside. And that's why when I was saying like, it makes me sad when I see people who are in the solo season who are living such a life of no. It's just like, man, like this is your season. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, all the way down to like the silliest of stuff. Like go try like a new fun activity. Like, I don't know, go dancing.
Yeah.
Like try, like I loved rock climbing.
Yeah.
Like, go do something, like, and just see if you like it, because you have so much of like an opportunity for yes at that time, right? Like we would literally climb every like Friday night and we'd go and spend the whole night climbing at the rock gym in Bloomington and then come home at like 1 or 2 in the morning and then just like, wake up and go to work the next day 8 a.m. because you're also young and tons of energy.
Yeah.
But like those times are just so good. And so many of those times too, those yeses, maybe that's also another point, is not even like the big things like that, but even just like the yes that we had to ministry, right? When we were in student ministry, and I don't know, so you were a whole step younger than me. That's one of the reasons why obviously like we didn't really date growing up. Well, obviously I was friends with your older brother, which is kind of weird, but actually we still never really spent that much time together because we were 5 years apart. So I was always like one grade level ahead of you. But even like in the time that we were in student ministry, I guess, what's your experience with this? I feel like even that though is like saying yes, even to like saying like being on like the student leadership team when we were in like our first youth ministry, right? That yes opened up so much because it changed my perspective of like what ministry was. Like I didn't show up with just the thought of like, what's in it for me, right? And instead like showing up and actually considering like the mission that's there and like meeting these kids that come in. And like we had some crazy ones at that time. I don't know if you remember some of the ones, I mean, between that and like our college ministry. But like growing like a heart for those people and like listening to people, encouraging people, and like trying to like walk through them with stuff. And like people like our friend Gina who had like, like unbelieving parents, and like what does that feel like? And then actually getting to hear someone explain like them coming to Christ and their parents like fighting against their beliefs and stuff. I feel like even just like that, yes, it like changed my perspective at that young age of going like, what if like if I'm a leader, how do I approach this?
Yeah. Like being the example then of like, I'm not just here to come. Like I'm actually going to try, like people are actually going to look at me as like, yeah, it totally changed it. But I even think like, when I think about that, one of the first opportunities I was asked was to serve in our kids ministry at our church. And it was different because it was a very personal, like, we had a new like children's pastor at our church, and he just said like, I think he asked your mom, like, is there anyone who could help me out? Because it was just him. She's like, I don't know, Aimee might. So he just like asked me like, would you help me out? And I was just like I remember it because it was like, it's yes or no. Like, it's like, I could have just said no, and it's like, okay.
How old were you, think?
14.
Dang, yeah.
So that was when I started serving, and we had 2 services on Sunday. So I would serve every Sunday in kids ministry and then go to the other service.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure we had Sunday school before
We
that.
did
When you
before.
talk about like
No,
the
it was.
hours that we would spend at
Yeah,
church.
it was. Yeah, because I would drum on those weekends.
Yeah.
It was. There'd be Sunday school, and then there would be 2 services. Yeah.
Because we did that. But so much good stuff happened there. So that was when I started like serving. So I think of that as like my first like yes. But as you see with God, when you start saying yes, a lot of times like when you're faithful in the small things, he gives you bigger things.
Yeah.
Then I was asked to vacuum at youth group. I remember that was one of my first opportunities.
Nice.
And so I said yes.
It's
So
like
that was
true like church planter skills that are foundational,
yes.
right?
The practical, like nitty gritty things.
Can you rack chairs? Can you
Yes.
vacuum floors? Can you watch kids?
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
So it was like doing that, taking attendance. That was another job I
I
had.
remember that you took attendance.
Yeah, that was my thing. And I don't know around the same time if that was the same time that I said yes to like the leadership team. But what's interesting is looking back as well.
Was I on the leadership team with you at the same time?
Yeah.
Was there overlap?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to remember.
Yeah. But those opportunities, the people who said no, it's so crazy now to look back and like, wow, we totally did go different directions.
Yeah.
Where like that yes did somewhat influence the rest of my life and the rest of the yeses that I would say to God.
That's like butterfly effect stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like one yes opens like a door to like another yes, to another yes, to another yes.
Well, and I think it just shows like
When you say no to God, what happens?
it's just like your heart and the way their direction you're going, I think, because like when I think back to some people, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't what they were interested at the time. And so, yeah, but like past even the youth group, it's like, yeah, the church plant, I guess, would be the next one where like I felt.
Yeah, that was a big one because
Yeah.
obviously you just started in our college ministry.
Yeah.
And I shared
think it was like literally the first week.
it was.
Or the second week where I was like super excited to start going because I was finally in like that college age. And you were like, by the way, I'm actually leaving.
I'm going to be leaving. Yeah. And that was so shocking because when that came, and I was like, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, right? And we didn't share it with our students because they were too young. Like, my mom ended up just telling them that she was leaving. But I ended up sharing it with like the campus ministry, like the college ministry that I was leading. And I was surprised by the yeses and surprised by the nos. I remember that specifically, like telling people like, would any of you want to like give yourself to this idea of like going and pursuing planting this church? And I remember being surprised by the people who said yes. Actually, I think I told you, you were like the first person who told me yes outside of my family.
Yeah.
Which is so surprising. One of those first nights you're like, I think I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's amazing. But like everything would have made me think that your brother would have been a yes. And like he was a no. And I was like surprised. Or there were other people who I figured were going to be a yes. And they were like a no. I was like, interesting. And then there were people who were a yes that like I would have never expected. Like even people who are very, very young in their faith. They're like, I want to do this with you, which is just like amazing. But those yeses then definitely did like open up that next phase. It's so crazy
it's
to
not
think. Like I know God has a plan, but again, like it's just so crazy to think like, so we would have never been married if you would have said no to that church plant.
And it's not like saying no to
My life
specific
cascades into darkness.
and it's not like
There's just like there's a different world right now.
Yeah.
Where Cameron's sitting here alone, just angry and bitter.
This is your life. You were in the solo season till now. 38.
Right now, if you're in the solo season, I like to think that I would have accomplished a lot, but I would just imagine I would just have such a hard, man, I'd be so hard. Just like this exterior of just like, I feel like you brought so much balance to my life that I wouldn't have had.
But like with the yeses and nos, it's not like saying no to an opportunity is like saying no to God all the time. Because it's like, say I would have said, I'm not saying everyone who said no to certain things is like they said no to God. But I think it is just like that sensitivity to God's leading and just being willing to try things too. Like that was another thing with the youth ministry, which is so crazy to think about. But your mom, I was like the shyest teenager ever. Very shy, very reserved. And your mom asked me to do announcements, which I still don't know why. That seems like the worst choice possible. But like even that, we're like, I didn't want to. I didn't think I was good at it, but I still said yes, I would do it. And I still don't know why. Like I don't
Interesting.
But I guess it was just maybe just like, I don't know, being willing to try it, I guess. And then obviously seeing how like all those years of doing that has now helped me, speaking on stage, like how God uses those things
Yeah.
later in life too. It prepares you, everything prepares you for the next season.
Yeah.
And just being willing to say yes to things, even like things like that, or like leading groups too. Like that's a huge thing that I've always like said yes to, tried to do. And none of it's ever been a loss. Like all of it has been so great at building relationships with people, leading groups, leading conversations. None of it is, it's none of it's wasted. And I think that's another thing in that solo season of like, if you're focusing on God and whatever He has for you, serving, developing those giftings, in whatever way, it's going to prepare you for the next. I think you said something along those lines in your message of how, like, doing those things with that verse in Proverbs, like,
Yeah, he who doesn't plow in the right season basically they'll be hungry at harvest.
Yeah.
And I think that's true because it's not just that the devil wants to rob your productivity in your solo season. It's because it really does leverage into those next things. All of the skills or all of the experience that I got during my solo season are things that I've utilized and things that I've went back to. I mean, honestly, sometimes it feels like a whole bunch of that is like still a lot of the stories that I tell, which is interesting, right? Like, not that my life has become more boring or less interesting since like we've got married and have kids and that. But it's like so much happens during that season if you are saying yes. So like a lot of my stories, like the craziest stories I tell people, like when we're hanging out, are like, oh man, let me tell you about this. Like, like that horrifying, embarrassing story I told you about, like being told to go on stage and just cut a guy off mid-set during a worship set by my leader. Like crazy stuff that like pushed you outside of yourself to be able to do. And that's where like I feel like people don't have that. I just had a guy a couple of years ago in our church that he felt like he had like a pull towards ministry in some sense, right? And he was like kind of asking like what he could do next. And we were just kind of laying out like different pathways that he could do. Because there's obviously like opportunities. You can literally go to college now and you can like pursue a career in ministry if you wanted to. That didn't feel like the right fit. There's a lot of cool schools now that are like more like internships, right? Where you go to like a missions program for like a year or two and you learn skills and like kind of get to do that. And he was kind of like, well, I don't really know if that's what I want to do either. And like, so my third pitch to him is I was like, maybe you should just go move and just go serve in another church somewhere else. And the reason why I said that wasn't like because I didn't want him here, but like the problem with just staying in the comfort spot that you're in is like you don't have to like grow new skills. And for him as like a young man, it's like you could obviously like pour out yourself into our local church and you can like learn these skills and you can grow yourself in regards to that. But then like part of it was like, I think what you should do is right now, while you're young, while you have no responsibilities, while you can, like pick up and move to like a whole different community you don't know for a year or two and serve like crazy in that church and learn as much as you can and grow in that. And then like if you want to come back here, that's cool. Or maybe you even want to go to a different environment. I'm like, what if you literally just picked up and you went to like some other place and you're just, I'm just coming here just to serve at this church and just to grow, but it's going to force you to have a new experience. Like it forces you out of that spot where you could grow and you could learn. Because I just think there's so much benefit to that. Like I don't know what I would have missed out, like if I hadn't got all those crazy experiences, like to go and see these things, like getting to be in multiple different campus ministries all over the United States, or getting to travel to Honduras and England, getting to teach in different environments that were kind of like good and hostile, right? Just all these different places where it's like, I feel like they just built out like my understanding so much of who I was and like what my skill set was, right? But yeah.
I know, like, after your message on Sunday, I talked to a friend of mine who also has little kids, and she was saying, like, man, don't you feel like even just, like, with the solo season, like even just like the time spent like reading God's word and all that, she's like, that it's such a gift in the solo season to be able to do that, because if you've never had little kids, you don't understand. But like being a mom, how it's like those times are so few and far between now.
When we were in college, my challenge to the college students was always, it was to get in the garden. That's what I would tell them. And it's because it's from that verse where Jesus goes to pray and he comes back and he's like, you couldn't keep watch with me for 1 hour. Like he says, like it was just 1 hour. So during that season, like I challenged myself and all of our college students, like, why don't you spend an hour a day in reading the Bible and in prayer? And we did for a whole season, an hour a day. We used to spend reading God's word and praying. Like that seems like impossible now in the season we're in as like parents, right? An hour a day, but we legit did at that
Yeah.
season where it was like, yeah, because also like, what else are you doing right
Yeah.
now? You gonna watch some TV?
Right.
You gonna play some video games? Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that was huge because I read through the Bible multiple times. When you read an
Yeah.
hour a day, you can read entire books of the Bible. You just blitz through sections, right?
Yeah.
I used to actually encourage people with that, where I used to tell them at least read 5 chapters, because what I used to find is when people would just read 1 chapter, it kind of felt like this weird segmented story. But if you start reading like 4 or 5, you really get into like the flow of like the story that's actually happening.
Like developing those spiritual disciplines can be such a good foundation. Like that's how you prepare for the next season.
Totally.
Is by like getting that foundation of reading God's word. And just like you said, like, yeah, I read it all through the years when I was a teenager, would read the whole Bible, you know? And I think sometimes when we look at like, I don't know, I'm getting old. Because like when you look at teenagers, you're like, oh man, but like, can they, like, yeah, you should
Yes.
be reading it when you're, as soon as you can read, like you can read and you can understand. And it's so good for you, because I was reminded the verse you read about Paul, where he was saying, a married man has to think about his wife, but an unmarried man is free from the cares and concerns. So he says the same thing, like an unmarried woman is free to focus on what pleases the Lord. And one of my first like journals I had, probably when I was like 15 or 16, like I had that verse written on a sticky note and like taped on the front, because it stood out to me of like, this is what you do when you're not married. Like you focus on what pleases the Lord. And like, so reading your Bible, even like prayer, like we talked about, every Tuesday night we would have prayer. And now looking back, we remember that so fondly, of just like being forced, almost like forced to just sit and just like pray
We
or
would come
think.
in and we would sit for an hour, and then we would come together and pray. But it was just an hour with no programming, just music. Just pray.
Yeah. And there are so many good times like within that, and like times that you feel like God speaks to you or not, and you just sit there in silence and just like, yeah. But it was so good.
Make prayer great again.
Yeah. We need to.
Russell. I feel like too, though, that it is interesting. You commented and I did as well. Both of us started serving in our local church on a weekly basis when we were like 13.
Yeah.
Yours was 14?
I think so, yeah.
I'm pretty sure mine was like, it was like 12 or 13.
Yeah.
I started drumming at our church when I was like, I think it was 13 years old. And I was on the worship team routinely. And then, yeah, I helped in kids' church as well, like with my sister and her boyfriend at the time. And I served like every weekend since I was like 13 years old.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, I get that serving in church isn't everything in regards to your relationship, but again, it's almost like just like another yes that other things come through. Like, no, like serving in church isn't gonna make you a good Christian, but like just being in that routine, it put me in the place where so many good things happened, because like my life was just so consistently tied to like my energy is meant to like take and like work through the local church. And that's why, actually, it's one of the reasons why I think that we worked out so well, like obviously when we started dating, is because like both of us have always had like such a passion for like the local church. Like, and that's like that twofold part. Like obviously we both loved Jesus. Like that's number one with two people who are going to get married and who are Christians. But the second part was like both of us loved like serving in the local church. Like it was just natural to us of like, of course you would like give as much time as you could to like serve the local church and like work through the church to be able to like bless people. And like, that's where you bring your friends to. That's where you're praying for. Like even when we were like teenagers. And I think that was a huge part of it was like, even that, like you said, like saying yes at 14, me saying at 13, like, yeah, I'm going to help play music like at our church. Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny when we think back and like when I was a teenager, sometimes my sister will joke like, well, mom was way more, she wasn't as strict with you. I'm like, I was at church. Like I was at church like 3 nights out of the week. Like that's why she was just like, okay.
Yeah.
And like looking back, I'm like, it makes sense that like, yeah, that you and I would get married and I would be part of a church because I've always just like loved being at church. Like I've never not wanted to go. And like, so I think that's just like the drawing I've been drawn to. It's never been like a struggle, of like, man, I really never really liked it. I just naturally did. But all of those things, when you look back, you see how God, prepares you for the next season. But like, yeah, even being in the season now with little kids, and it's like, it is different where it's like, you don't get as many quiet times as you did then, or even like the train of thought, like I'm with our kids all the time. So it's even different for me, but yeah, just like thinking back of like how much time you would have to just like sit and think and pray. And now it's totally different. But there's good things in that as well. But it is focus is such a gift in that season to be able to just like become secure in who you are in Christ and not having the relationship yet, the marriage relationship, just making sure you know who you are in Christ during those years, I think is super important no matter what age you are in that solo season.
I think, yes, totally, because that's that opportunity you have to actually become who you are. I was not the same person at 16 as I was at 18. I was not the same person at 18 that I was by 21. And I definitely was not the same person by 21 to like 25 when we got married. Like I feel like I changed in each of those seasons. And that's the benefit of that season. Because in all reality, like even by the time you hit 18, I feel like you really have only been in the solo season for like something like 3 or 4 years. You're just getting started in it, and then you're actually trying to figure out like where you go from there, like what you actually value, what you don't, or just even having seasons to go through. Like you're supposed to go through those different seasons of like seasons of being happy, seasons of being sad, seasons of being lonely, like the different stuff like that, and going through that. And I really do believe like God does have the plan for that, especially again. Seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added unto you. What used to make me sad is I always thought like, I think there are a lot of people that if you told them, right, like in that season, I remember when we were like walking through it of like the high school age or like young college age, I remember thinking like, if God told them like, I have the perfect person for you, like I have it planned out for you.
Right.
It's going to be 5 years. I feel like at the time, I remember thinking like, I think a bunch of you would just be like, I'll just pick someone today. Like, cause there was so little like patience of like, well, maybe God does have a plan. What if I just focused on him for this season and then he would bring the right person at the right time, right? And that's totally obviously what I feel like was the situation with us where we walked past a lot of different people. I had to pretend that I didn't understand that girls flirted with me. That was my tactic back in the day of the college ministry, was when they would flirt with me, I would pretend like I didn't get it. I would play the fool and be like, yeah, and like obvious. And then you were always beautiful and attractive, so that was why, like, the Lord kept you for away from these terrible men who I'm sure would have been fascinated by you. I still remember telling you that I was terrified when you got your braces taken off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, and that was, we were never even dating at that time. I was just like, oh goodness.
But it's a time to become the person you're looking for is looking for.
100%. Yeah.
Like, yeah, who do you want to be with? And are they going to be attracted to you? Like as a girl, you think like, oh, I want a strong Christian man. I want a guy who's serious about his relationship with Jesus. Okay, are you serious about yours?
Yeah.
Because if a guy is that strong Christian man, he's going to want a woman who's like that too. So I think it's always important to remember that in that season of like, too, if you're messing around and like dating all these people, it's like when that right person does come, you're not going to be ready for them.
Yeah.
Or are they going to be interested in you, the way you're dating or whatever you're doing? So I think that's always a good thing to remember too in that season.
Yeah. That's like another part of focus is all these other distractions, all these other things that pull you in different ways. And relationships are like that is probably like one of the most deadly parts during that. I think there are other things that can be things that would steal your focus, but I feel like that's like the one that people always really wrestle with at that time, right? It's like wanting that next phase, wanting that person in their life.
I think too that even like looking back, laziness is a temptation. And one of the good things too that I think about my solo season is like that I just worked a lot. Like I always had like 2 jobs, and that's the funny thing about like when people will talk about our life now and be like, oh, you guys are so busy, like you have a lot going on. I'm like, we've always been busy. Like we're always just people who we do a lot of things, like not busy for the sake of busy, but like even when we started dating, I had 2 jobs and all the ministry stuff that we were already doing. So it's not like we just sat around, and waited for each other. We've always been like had a full life, I should say.
Yeah.
And then too, like I played volleyball, still for the first few years that we were together. But even that, like the working, like such good experience. Like even now, like all the different jobs I had, working long nights. And it is like, the glory of the young is their strength. That's the verse that you shared this weekend.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's so funny how when we planted the church, so this would be still, so still before we were married or anything, we would, meet at 7 a.m. to set up.
Yeah.
Just everyone would meet at 7 a.m.
The whole church team would meet
Yeah.
at 7 a.m. to set up because church service started at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
we
it
would
was
get
like
there
a
at 7.
sprint to get everything done still.
Yeah, because our initial team was only like 15 people and we were completely mobile. So we had to pull up the trailer, we had to unload it multiple times, showing up at 7 a.m. And remember, it wasn't
Yes.
unlocked.
Yes.
The place was still
Yeah.
locked because the guys who ran the Knights of Columbus Hall would get drunk and then they wouldn't show up. And then like we would have to like figure out. I remember that's what it was. The first Easter we did at the Knights of Columbus, we showed up, no one was there, no one would answer.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, we went around the building and I think like literally by miracle, my father like jiggled a security door with like no handle on it and it hadn't latched.
Oh my gosh.
Someone had like accidentally left it partly open because they went out back to like dump garbage and we pulled it open and then we're able to go in and have our Easter service. And it was after our Easter service was like when they finally called us back. Terrifying. But yes, like 7 a.m. We used to all I used to bring a different shirt because we would all just be soaked in sweat trying to clean the place up to be able to set up for our first, for the service. And then, like get everything set up, worship team start practicing, get all the kids' areas set up right. And then like by 9, we would try to like stop and pray and then get ready for 9:30 to people start showing up.
And I would like work, I was a waitress at the time, and I would like close on Saturday night. So I'd be working till like 1 a.m.
Dang.
And then it'd be like 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
Well, at 1 a.m., didn't you have to go get juice because you were
Sometimes,
you were the courtesy coordinator? So you had to go get juice and then still be there at 7 a.m.?
Yeah, sometimes. But it's like, if you have kids, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
of like trying to be somewhere at 7 a.m. and like just a different season of life where it's like we were able to do that because we were in that season of like not having all those extra
sure.
responsibilities. And I think that God definitely used us in that season, where we wouldn't have been able to. Like you were saying before too, like I never thought of that with planting a church, like how in the season we were in, it wasn't a whole lot to lose because we're like, hey, let's just try it. Like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
We just won't anymore. Like, no one comes and nothing happens. And
Right.
okay, it's not
Yeah.
a big loss. Whereas, say, this season of our life, we were going to start from scratch and like plant a church, it would be a whole different conversation because
Totally.
you do have all those extra responsibilities and it'd just be totally different.
And so the unbalance that I talked about in my message, I get like it's meant to show the unbalance, but honestly too, we'll talk about this next week. Even during that season where like I know like I'm like, money is actually like low, you still feel richer
Yeah.
than when you're in the married with kids season.
Right.
Because still your bills are so low that like the tiny amount of money you have is like, like you still have so much mobility in regards to that to be able to try something and do stuff.
Yeah.
I just went back and looked up our old giving stuff because I had never compiled a year over year. And 2010, when we launched, do you know what our total yearly budget was?
For our whole church?
For the whole church for the whole year. What do you think was total giving for 2010?
15 grand?
39,000.
Oh.
So you were a little that was
I
like
was
20,
thinking, like, we were
that was
like
like
15
2009. But no, it was crazy though, because remember we were renting though. Each week our location cost us $300 to rent. So when you do the math out of that, right, it was going to be $15,000 for the year to rent that location. And our budget of what we had for the total year, like what we were bringing in was 39. We were spending like almost half just on renting
Right.
that spot so that we could have services at the time. But I refused to go anywhere smaller because I knew God was doing something like big, like I knew he was going to.
Yeah.
We should tell the story sometime of having our location scouted, ready for it, and then canceling it the night before our launch, and then having to like move it to a different building.
Yeah,
Craziness.
there's a lot of stories we could tell about those first few years.
Oh man, yeah.
Another thing, though, that I really loved that you said in the message was not to define the season by what you don't have.
Yes.
And I think that's so true. And even like as people trying to support people in that season too, even saying that how we say it is unmarried, don't have kids.
Yes.
And so we're defining it by what they don't have.
Yeah, it's the wrong way to talk about it for sure.
Or like even rushing people into that season of like, when are you going to move into the next season? And focusing on all the good that's in that season instead of like what might not be in it yet.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Because I just think like nobody who's in the solo season is unclear about the fact that they don't have a romantic relationship. They know the pain of that legitimately that they're walking in. And I just think like that's such a wrong way of even labeling that, because it's like, no, like again, Paul's like, I wish you were you were like me. Because he's just like, there's so much good here. Like and maybe that's also part of it too. If anything else, like maybe even this message that I taught last weekend, my hope would be that it would maybe even just change people's perspective on like the feeling of it. Because I feel like very often it is, like I said, like where people think of like marriage as the blessing and this is like the curse you have to go through. And it's like both are a gift. Both are a gift. It's such a gift to be in the solo season, right? Like there's so much awesome potential that's there and what you're able to do. That's why like young guys especially, like I just push them all the time when they're solo. Like, man, now's the time. Like when I hear a guy and they're like, I think I might want to start a business or something, like, dude, just start it. Like, let's go. Like, do it now because it's going to be so much easier. Like now is a great time to leverage that, right? Or I actually didn't get to say it in my message. I wanted to, but like the solo season is when you should get in shape. Like if you're overweight, unhealthy, like that season, like, dude, I can just tell you for sure.
Right.
Like, we got married, had kids and stuff like that. And it is so difficult to keep up with that part where it's like dude, that's your season to build like a foundation of like health, like create those right things. Because like if you start the family season and you're already 100 pounds overweight, or you have like problems as far as like you don't have good habits and stuff and you're sickly, it's like it's just gonna get so hard. Like this is the time to fix those things about you too and like work on them, because you have the opportunity to say yes, right? Like can be like our crazy nephew who gets up at 4 a.m. to go work out for 2 hours so that
Right.
he can, before he goes to work,
Yeah.
right? That's awesome. Like that's the stuff you can do.
Yeah. You had a chubby phase after we got married.
Yeah, it's because I used to survive on bread and salami.
Yeah. It doesn't get better.
And then you started cooking me delicious
Yeah.
meals consistently.
You actually had to like eat food.
Yeah, yeah. I never ate anything back then. Yeah, it was when we planted our church. When we planted our church, I had just done like a 7-day fast.
Yeah.
If you ever look at like our first pictures of our church, I was 137 pounds at the time. But like, yeah, I would walk around at like 145, 150. It was pretty consistent, right in between there. So it's very easy. Over those handful of years after we got married, I went from 150 to 185. That was my
Yes.
wake up call moment
Yeah.
of how much, because of like the stress of launching our church and then not doing that. That was like my wake up call of having to change, was 185. And I was like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
I have to stop. And thank the Lord, I was able to pull more than 15 pounds off that. I still probably could, honestly, stand at least another 10 to 15 pounds of weight loss beyond that. I wouldn't mind to go back to that. But yes, that's your opportunity, though.
Yeah.
It's so much harder later on.
Yes. All those things take major intentionality. Like,
When we were having kids for the last handful of years, because we had 4 kids back to back to back, I mean, there were literally years where I couldn't even like get up early and get going, because it was just like the trying to care for like multiple kids at a time. You're kind of like in survival mode during that
yes.
time.
Yes. And definitely like with the spiritual disciplines too, it's like they just take so much more intentionality when you have kids. Of like, yes, of course, you can even still find time to read your Bible and pray in spurts at different times of when you're caring for little kids, but it's just so much harder. And where it's easier if you have that routine, already set out. Where like, yeah, I'm used to, where you're not like, I'm gonna start reading my Bible when I have kids, like
Right.
I'm gonna get serious about my faith then. It's like, you gotta do it now,
Yeah.
so that it can carry you through the years where it's like a little bit tougher, or you have that relationship with that other person or whatever. So you're not trying to like start all those things in that season.
Yeah, I think that's good. It's very true. I'm excited for this next week. So I'm going to talk about the family season. There's a lot of good there for sure, encouraging inside of it. It's a very emotional season, which is cool compared to some of the other ones for sure. But yeah, it's neat. Single season. Superpower is yes. So you shouldn't live a life of no. Focus. And I agree that probably one of the biggest distractions that people have is the relationship thing. People would be better to just take and put a time frame on it, right, and pause during that season, because they know they're not ready to get married. They know they have work to do. If you just eliminated that from your mind for a season and just said, like, I believe God will provide, right? Like, I think there's that fear that you're going to miss something. It's like God's going to provide. If you knew, like, I'm not going to be ready to be married for the next 5 years, then why would I waste the next 5 years being distracted? Just focus on the season you're in, right? And then also just, like we were saying, like, it's such a great season to set those rhythms for, like, spiritually speaking, right? Like, to do that work. Like I said, you read the Bible for an hour a day. Like, stuff like that you could do you're going to have a hard time later on in life, and you can build those right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of my other favorite things that you said was like the difference from the season feeling solo and so low is the relationships we have with other Christians and being part of a church, and how important that is. Like, whether you're 14 or like you're in your solo season later in life, I think that can make all the difference of like being around Christians, being around your brothers and sisters, so it's not lonely and you don't have like the lows, or you don't stay in a low, even though they do come. But being around people in that season is super important too.
Yeah, and that's true too. That season is marked by the fact of like our relationships. And I feel like that was a season where I had to cut off relationships of people who weren't going the direction I was going. And a lot of people don't want to do that, but I think it is really critical that you identify like there are people who are not going the same direction you're going, whether it's like goals wise or it's like health wise or like spiritual wise is obviously like the really big one for Christians. And to realize like I'm not in the season to be able to keep pursuing relationship and friendship with them. I had guys in my life that I had to just not spend time with during that season because they influenced me more than I influenced them. Because influence is so like, it's so important at that age, right? When you're in your solo season. You get married and have kids and you're just like, people are like, they don't like you. And you're like, I don't even care.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't even bother me, right?
Right.
But during that solo season, it means so much more. And that's why it's so critical, I think, to be conscious of who you have around you, right?
Yeah. Me and you.
It is like our personality.
Why do you say our personality?
It's both. So see, you're tall.
I thought it was just a
and
visual
I'm short.
representation.
Well, yes, you're tall and I'm short. But then also, this is brewed with water, so it's tempered, and then it has cream in it, right? So it's like it's softer. Does it have sugar in it?
Yeah, a
See,
little
so
bit.
it's sweet, and then mine is just literally espresso with steamed milk. So it's just punchy.
No,
and
no
mean.
fluff. Just
Yeah, it's just like a little bulldog. Like that's kind of who I am.
yeah.
So it kind of looks like me. But yeah, look, us.
Yeah.
Aw.